You're not animals. The words didn't come from anger. They came from something quieter, something heavier, like a truth that had been waiting too long to be spoken. West Texas, September 1944. The sun sat high and unforgiving, pressing heat down onto the dry earth until the air itself felt thick enough to taste. Dust lifted in slow spirals behind a military transport truck as it rolled to a stop just outside the camp's processing yard. No one rushed. No one spoke. The engine ticked as it cooled. A guard stepped forward, boots crunching against gravel, and opened the back gate. One by one, the women began to descend. Their movements were careful. Not hesitant, controlled. Each step measured. Because around their ankles, iron rested where skin should have been free. Short chains connected each step to the next, limiting stride, forcing a rhythm that was not their own. The sound came first. Metal brushing against metal. A dull, dragging note against the ground. It cut through the silence more sharply than any command could have. 6 women. Gray uniforms faded by sun and travel. Faces set, eyes forward. Nurses once. Hands that had held bandages, steadied breathing, closed wounds. Now those same hands hung still at their sides, fingers unmoving, as if motion itself required permission. They did not look at the guards. They did not look at the land stretching endlessly beyond the fence line. They did not look at anything at all. A few yards away, Jack McKenna stood beside a weathered wooden post, his hat casting a shadow across his face. 61 years old. Born and raised on land not too far from here. He had seen droughts that cracked the ground open, storms that flattened barns, and men come back from war quieter than they left. He understood hardship. He understood silence. But this was something else. He watched the way the first woman stepped down from the truck. The way her foot touched the ground, then adjusted, not freely, but within the limits of iron. He noticed how she didn't look down to check her footing. As if she had already learned what the ground allowed. His eyes moved from one woman to the next. No defiance. No pleading. Just a stillness. That didn't belong to fear alone. It was something deeper. Something settled. Something that had already been taken, long before this moment. The guard began reading from a clipboard, voice flat, procedural, words falling into the air without weight. Names. Numbers. Instructions. It all sounded the same. Jack didn't listen. He was watching the chains. The way they shortened every step. The way they changed posture. The way they made each woman smaller without touching her shoulders. A breeze moved across the yard, carrying the faint scent of dry grass and sun-warmed wood. One of the women shifted slightly, adjusting her balance. The chain pulled tight for a fraction of a second, then settled again. That small movement. That quiet correction. It stayed with him. For a long moment, he said nothing. Not because he didn't have something to say. But because he needed to be certain. The yard remained still. Guards waiting. Prisoners standing. Heat pressing down on everything equally. Then, without raising his voice, without stepping forward, Jack McKenna spoke. Take them off. No one moved at first. The words settled into the heat, into the dust, into the space between men who were used to orders and men who were used to following them. The guard with the clipboard looked up, uncertain if he had heard correctly. He glanced toward the nearest officer, waiting for confirmation that did not come. The officer shifted his weight slightly, eyes narrowing, not in anger but in calculation. Protocol existed for a reason. Procedures had been written, reviewed, approved. They were not meant to be questioned in the middle of a processing yard under an open sky. Sir, the guard said carefully, his voice low, they arrived under transport security. The restraints stay on until intake is complete. Jack did not look at him. His eyes remained on the women. On the way the second one in line adjusted her stance again, subtly, as if her body had already memorized the limits placed on it. "Take them off," he repeated. Same tone. No edge. No urgency. Just certainty. The officer took a step forward now, boots pressing deeper into the dry ground. He was younger than Jack, uniform crisp. Posture straight in the way that came from training rather than years. "We have regulations," he said. "These are prisoners of war. We follow procedure." Jack nodded once, almost as if acknowledging the truth in that statement. Then he spoke again, quieter this time, but somehow carrying further. "They are not animals." The words did not challenge authority. They did not argue policy. They simply placed something else in the space where procedure had been standing alone. For a moment, the yard held its breath. Even the small sounds seemed to pause. No boots shifting. No paper moving. Just the faint hum of heat rising from the ground. The officer looked past Jack, toward the line of women. He saw what he had seen before. Prisoners. Uniforms. Restraints. Nothing unusual. But now, with the words still hanging in the air, something else began to take shape. The way their shoulders stayed level despite the imbalance below. The way their hands remained steady, not clenched, not reaching. The way their eyes did not wander, not because they were forced not to, but because they had learned not to expect anything worth looking at. It was not defiance. It was not submission. It was something in between. Something that did not fit neatly into the categories written in manuals. The officer exhaled slowly, the sound barely noticeable. He turned slightly toward the guard. A pause. A decision forming in silence. Then, without raising his voice, he gave a single instruction. "Remove them." The guard hesitated only a fraction of a second before stepping forward. He reached for the keys at his belt, the metal ring catching the sunlight as it moved. He knelt in front of the first woman. Up close, the details became clearer. Dust along the edge of her shoe. A faint line on her ankle where iron had rested too long. Skin that had adjusted to pressure instead of resisting it. He did not speak. He inserted the key. Turned it. The lock clicked open with a sound so small it almost disappeared in the open air. The chain loosened. For a second, nothing changed. Then gravity took over. The metal slipped free and fell the last few inches to the ground. A soft, final sound. Not loud. But unmistakable. The woman did not move immediately. She remained exactly where she was, as if waiting for something else to happen. An order. A correction. When none came, her weight shifted. Slightly. Carefully. Testing something that had not been available before. One foot moved forward. Not far. Just enough to feel the difference. Behind her, the next lock opened. Then the next. One by one. Each with the same quiet click. Each followed by the same pause. And with every chain that touched the ground, the space in the yard changed. Not visibly. Not dramatically. But undeniably. Something invisible was being returned. Not all at once. Not completely. But enough to be felt. Jack remained where he was, hat low, eyes steady. He did not step in. He did not speak again. He simply watched as the last set of irons came loose and fell away, leaving nothing between the women and the ground beneath their feet but the space they chose to take. For a long moment, no one spoke. The chains lay scattered across the dirt, small lengths of iron catching the sunlight in dull flashes, as if they still expected to be lifted again. The guards stepped back into position, unsure whether to resume their routine or wait for another instruction that might change everything once more. The officer returned to his clipboard, but he did not write immediately. His pen hovered, then lowered slowly, as though the lines he had followed for years no longer fit as neatly as they once had. The women remained where they stood, not out of hesitation, but because movement now required a different kind of decision. The first woman in line, Anna Weiss, shifted her weight again. This time, nothing pulled back. No resistance. No correction. Just space. She looked down, not quickly, not with surprise, but with careful attention, as if confirming something her body was still learning to trust. The ground beneath her boots was the same dry Texas soil it had been moments ago. But it felt different. Not softer. Not cooler. Just, hers to step on. She took another step. Slightly longer this time. The motion was uneven, not because she was weak, but because she had been trained, for hours, for days, to move within limits that no longer existed. Behind her, another woman adjusted her footing, then another. Small changes. Quiet shifts. Nothing dramatic. But together, they created something new in the yard. The absence of constraint. One of the guards glanced at Anna, then quickly looked away, as if unsure whether eye contact was now permitted in this altered space. He cleared his throat softly and began reading names again, his voice returning to its measured tone, but something had changed there too. The rhythm was slower. More deliberate. Each name carried weight instead of passing quickly into the air. Anna lifted her head slightly. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to allow her eyes to move forward instead of down. She did not look at the guards. She did not look at the officer. Her gaze moved past them, beyond the fence line, toward the open stretch of land that seemed to go on for miles. It was the first time she had looked that far since stepping off the truck. The horizon shimmered in the heat, a thin line where sky met earth, untouched by wire or structure. She held that line in her vision for a second longer than necessary, as if marking its existence somewhere inside her. Jack McKenna watched this without expression, but his stance had shifted almost imperceptibly. The tension in his shoulders eased, not in relief, but in recognition. He had seen this before, though not like this. In men returning home. In animals freed from a fence too tight. That first uncertain step into open space. It was never loud. Never dramatic. It was always quiet. And always irreversible. The officer finished calling the last name and closed the clipboard with a soft snap. "You will be assigned work details," he said, voice steady again, but no longer detached. "You will follow instructions. You will be treated according to regulations." He paused, just for a fraction of a second, then added, "You will be treated fairly." The words were simple. Standard, perhaps. But in the space that now existed in the yard, they carried a different meaning. Anna did not react outwardly. No nod. No expression. But her hands, which had remained still at her side since her arrival, flexed once. A small movement. Almost unnoticeable. As if something inside her had shifted just enough to allow motion again. The wind moved lightly through the yard, stirring dust across the ground where the chains still lay. No one picked them up immediately. They remained there, scattered and quiet, no longer defining anything, no longer attached to anyone. And for the first time since the truck had arrived, the yard did not feel like a place of arrival. It felt like the beginning of something else. The assignments began without ceremony. A guard gestured toward the far end of the yard, where a line of wooden posts marked the start of the work routes leading out toward the surrounding land. No trucks this time. No chains guiding their steps. Just open ground and expectation. The women moved as a group at first, their pace slow but no longer restricted, each step slightly out of rhythm with the one before, as if their bodies were still negotiating with a freedom they had not yet fully accepted. Anna walked near the front, not because she chose to lead, but because she had been first in line when they stepped down from the truck. The position had stayed with her. She noticed the difference immediately. The distance between one step and the next. The absence of weight pulling backward. The way her heel met the ground without interruption. It was a simple motion. Ordinary. Something she had done her entire life without thought. Now it required attention. Across the yard, a few men were already waiting near a set of wagons and tools stacked neatly against a low fence. Civilian workers. Ranch hands. Their hats sat low, their sleeves rolled, their posture relaxed in a way that came from familiarity with the land rather than authority over it. They watched the group approach, not openly staring, but not pretending not to notice either. One of them adjusted his hat slightly, eyes narrowing against the sunlight as he took in the scene. Not the uniforms. Not the guards. The way the women walked. Jack McKenna moved ahead of them, his pace steady, boots leaving shallow prints in the dust. He did not look back to check if they followed. He assumed they would. When he reached the wagons, he rested one hand against the wooden rail and waited. The ranch hands shifted slightly, making space without being told. It was a small gesture. Unspoken. But it carried its own kind of instruction. Anna slowed as she approached, her eyes taking in details she had not allowed herself to notice before. The grain of the wood on the wagon. The coiled rope hanging from a hook. A tin cup resting upside down on the edge of a barrel. Objects that belonged to a world that functioned on routine rather than control. One of the ranch hands picked up the cup, filled it from a nearby water container, and set it back down. He did not offer it directly. He simply placed it within reach. Then he stepped back. No words. No expectation. Anna hesitated, not because she doubted the gesture, but because accepting it required a shift she was still learning to make. She looked at the cup, then at the man, then back at the cup. Her hand moved slowly, fingers closing around the metal as if confirming it was real. The surface was warm from the sun. The water inside cooler. She lifted it carefully and took a small sip. Nothing dramatic. No reaction. Just a quiet acknowledgement of something given without condition. Around her, the others began to do the same. One by one. Each movement measured. Each acceptance deliberate. Jack watched this from a short distance, his expression unchanged, but his attention fixed. He was not observing for compliance. He was watching for something else. Something harder to define. The officer approached him, stopping just within speaking distance. They will be assigned to field work, he said. Light labor. Within regulations. Jack nodded once. They will learn, he replied. The officer followed his gaze toward the women, now standing among tools and wagons, no longer separated by chains or distance. You changed the tone of this place today, the officer said quietly. Jack did not answer immediately. His eyes remained on Anna as she lowered the cup and set it back where she found it. Not handing it back. Not returning it. Just placing it down, as if it belonged there, and she had simply used it for a moment. No, Jack said after a pause. It was always there. The wind picked up again, carrying the scent of dry grass across the open land beyond the fence. And for the first time since their arrival, the space between the two groups did not feel like a boundary. It felt like something waiting to be crossed. Work began without announcement. Tools were handed out in silence, each item passed from one set of hands to another with no explanation beyond the motion itself. A rake. A bucket. A length of rope. Simple things. Familiar to those who had used them before. Foreign to those who had not. Anna stood with a pair of worn gloves resting in her palms. The leather was cracked, shaped by someone else's grip long before it reached her. She turned them over once, then slipped them on. They were slightly too large. Her fingers did not fill them completely. But they would hold. That was enough. Jack stepped toward the group, not as a commander, not as a guard, but as someone who expected to be understood without raising his voice. He picked up a tool from the wagon, a simple hoe, its handle smooth from years of use. He did not explain. He demonstrated. One motion. Then another. Slow. Clear. He pressed the blade into the dry soil, lifted, turned, repeated. No words. Just rhythm. The women watched. Not all at once. Each in her own time. Anna's eyes followed the movement carefully, noting the angle, the pressure, the way the soil broke apart under steady force rather than sudden effort. She stepped forward when the space opened. Not asked. Not told. She positioned the tool as she had seen, adjusted her grip once, then pressed downward. The first motion was uneven. The soil resisted slightly, the blade catching at an angle that did not match the land. She corrected it. Tried again. This time, the earth gave way more easily, separating into smaller pieces that shifted beneath her boots. She did not look up. She did not seek approval. She simply repeated the motion. Around her, others began the same process. Some slower. Some more certain. Each finding their own rhythm within the shared space. The ranch hands moved among them, not directing, not correcting with words, but adjusting small things when needed. A hand. Placed slightly higher on a handle. A quiet tap to shift footing. Nothing that drew attention. Nothing that demanded acknowledgment. The work settled into the air like a steady breath. The sound of metal against soil. The soft movement of boots pressing into ground. The occasional creak of wood from the wagon behind them. No one hurried. There was no urgency in the task. Only continuity. The kind that did not end when the day did. Anna felt the difference first in her hands. The pressure of the tool. The friction through the worn leather. Then in her arms. A slow, steady strain that built without sharpness. It was not unfamiliar. It was not foreign. It was simply work. But work done without being watched in the way she had expected. Without the constant awareness of judgment pressing from every direction. She paused once, lifting the tool slightly, her breath steady, her posture unchanged. She looked at the ground she had turned. A narrow line. Not perfect. Not straight. But real. Something she had altered. Something she had done. She set the blade back into the soil and continued. Jack observed from a distance, leaning lightly against the wagon, his arms resting in a way that suggested patience rather than control. He watched the patterns form. Not in the soil. In the movement of people. The way hesitation gave way to repetition. The way repetition began to resemble confidence. Not fully. Not yet. But enough to be seen if one was paying attention. The officer stood beside him again, quieter now, his presence less defined by rank and more by observation. They adapt quickly, he said. Jack nodded once. People do, he replied. The sun moved slightly across the sky, shifting shadows along the ground, stretching them longer across the field. Time passed without announcement. No bell. No signal. Just the gradual understanding that the day was moving forward, and they were moving with it. Anna adjusted her grip again, this time without hesitation. The tool fit better now. Not because it had changed, but because she had. And somewhere behind her, near the edge of the yard, the chains still lay where they had fallen, untouched, quiet, and already beginning to gather. Dust. The rhythm held as the morning stretched into midday, the sun climbing higher until shadows shortened beneath their feet and the air carried a steady warmth that settled into skin and fabric alike. No one called for a break, yet it came naturally, as if the land itself dictated when enough had been done for a moment. Tools were lowered, not dropped. Movement slowed, then paused. The work did not end. It simply rested. Anna straightened her back carefully, one hand still wrapped around the handle of the tool, the other lifting slightly as if to release tension she had not noticed building. She inhaled deeply, the air dry but steady, and for the first time since stepping into the field, she allowed her eyes to move without purpose. The land stretched wide in front of her, rows beginning to take shape where there had been only untouched ground before. Not perfect rows. Not yet. But visible. Measurable. Real. A quiet record of effort that did not require anyone to confirm it. Nearby, one of the ranch hands walked toward the water container again, lifting the lid and dipping the same tin cup into the cool contents. He drank first, a simple gesture, then refilled it and set it down where it had been before. The same place. The same distance. Nothing announced. Nothing offered directly. Anna watched this, not openly, but through the corner of her awareness. When the space felt right, she stepped forward again, slower now not from hesitation but from intention. Her hand reached for the cup with more certainty than before. She lifted it, drank, then paused for a brief second longer than necessary. Not to look around. Not to check for permission. Just to feel the moment settle. When she placed the cup back, her hand released it without lingering. Around her, the others mirrored the same quiet pattern. No one spoke. Yet something like understanding moved between them, unspoken and steady. Jack remained near the wagon, his posture unchanged, his attention constant but not intrusive. He watched the way the group held itself now, the subtle shift from guarded stillness to something more fluid. Not relaxed. Not fully. But no longer held in place by something external. The officer stood beside him again, though this time his arms were not crossed, his stance less rigid, as if the weight of command had adjusted to the tone of the space around him. "They have not asked questions," he said quietly. Jack glanced toward him briefly, then back to the field. "They will," he replied. The officer considered that, his gaze following the same line across the rows forming under steady hands. "And when they do?" Jack rested his hand against the wagon rail again, the wood warm beneath his palm. "We answer," he said simply. The wind shifted slightly, moving across the field with a softer touch now, carrying with it the faint scent of turned soil. It passed over the women, over the tools, over the ground that had been changed piece by piece. Anna closed her eyes for just a fraction of a second as the breeze reached her, not to escape the moment, but to register it. To mark it. Then she opened them again and stepped back into position, lifting the tool with a motion that no longer required thought. The work resumed, not as an obligation, but as a continuation. Each movement fitting into the next, each action building quietly on the one before. No one rushed. No one fell behind. The space between them held steady, no longer defined by distance or control, but by a shared rhythm that had formed without instruction. And far behind them, near the edge of the yard where the truck had once stood, the chains remained where they had been left, half covered now by a thin layer of dust, their shape still visible but already losing its sharpness, as if the ground itself had begun to forget they were ever needed. The afternoon settled in without announcement, the light shifting from sharp white to a softer gold that stretched across the field and lengthened every shadow. The work continued, but something in the pace had changed. Not slower. Not faster. Just steadier. As if the movements no longer needed to prove anything. Anna felt it first in her breathing. It no longer matched effort alone. It matched rhythm. In and out. Step and lift. Press and turn. The pattern held, quiet and consistent, until it became something she did not have to think about. That was when her mind began to move elsewhere. Not far. Just enough to notice what surrounded her. The sound of boots in soil. The creak of wood behind her. The low murmur of wind moving across open land. And something else. A voice. Not loud. Not directed at her. One of the ranch hands, speaking to another a few yards away. The words were simple. About the field. About the weather. About nothing that required attention. But the tone carried something unfamiliar. Ease. It was not guarded. It was not measured. It was just, spoken. Anna's hands continued their motion, but her awareness shifted slightly toward the sound. She did not understand every word. Only fragments. But the meaning was not in the words. It was in how they were said. No urgency. No command. No correction. Just presence. A few minutes later, one of the ranch hands moved closer to her row, adjusting a section of soil that had not broken evenly. He worked beside her without interruption, his movements aligned with hers for a brief moment, then separate again. As he stepped back, he said something quietly. Not a command. Not an instruction. Just a short phrase. She caught one word. Good. It was not emphasized. It was not repeated. It was not followed by anything else. He simply continued walking. Anna did not respond. She did not look up. But the word remained. Not as praise. Not as validation. Just as something placed into the space between effort and observation. Something she had not expected to receive. Her grip tightened slightly on the handle, not from tension, but from awareness. She adjusted her stance, shifted her weight, and continued. This time, the movement felt different. Not because it had changed. But because she had. Across the field, the others followed their own quiet paths of adjustment. Small improvements. Slight corrections. Nothing dramatic. But visible if one watched long enough. Jack did. He remained near the edge, his presence constant but never imposed. He saw the way heads lifted slightly more often now. The way pauses no longer carried uncertainty, but choice. The way the space between each person held something that had not been there before. Not trust. Not yet. But. The beginning of it. The officer stood a few steps behind him, silent longer than before, his gaze moving across the same field but with a different focus. They are changing, he said finally. Jack shook his head once, almost imperceptibly. No, he replied. They are remembering. The officer did not answer. He watched as Anna reached the end of her row and stopped. She looked down at the line she had made. Then, for the first time, she turned. Not quickly. Not sharply. Just enough to see the distance she had covered. It was not long. Maybe 30 feet. Maybe a little more. But it was hers. Measured not in orders, but in steps she had taken on her own. She stood there for a moment, the tool resting lightly in her hands, the field stretching in both directions. Then she repositioned herself at the start of the next line and began again. No signal. No instruction. Just continuation. The sun dipped slightly lower, and the light softened further, settling over the field like a quiet acknowledgment of the work that had been done and the work that would continue. And somewhere beneath the surface of that steady rhythm, something unseen had shifted just enough to make the next step feel different from the last. The light began to change in a way that could not be ignored. It no longer pressed down from above but stretched across the land, long and angled, turning every movement into something visible from a distance. Shadows extended beside each person, no longer tucked beneath them, but walking with them, keeping pace. The field, once flat and uniform, now carried lines that caught the light differently. Rows that had not existed in the morning now shaped the ground into something intentional. Anna noticed it when she paused again, this time not from effort, but from awareness. She stood still, the tool resting lightly against the soil, and looked across the field. The work of many hands had created something larger than any single motion. It was not perfect. Some lines wavered. Some sections remained uneven. But together, they formed a pattern that held. That was enough. A bell did not ring, but the day began to close itself. One of the ranch hands moved toward the wagon and lifted a small lantern, though it was not yet needed. Habit, not necessity. Another began gathering tools that had been set aside. Not abruptly. Not as an order. Just a quiet signal that the rhythm of the day was shifting into something else. Anna lowered her tool and stepped back from the row she had been working. She did not rush to leave it. She looked at it once more, the length of the line now clearer in the softer light. Then she placed the tool carefully against the wagon, aligning it with the others already resting there. Not tossed. Not dropped. Placed. Around her, the others followed the same pattern. Each movement deliberate. Each action carrying the same quiet consistency that had shaped the hours before. No one needed to be told. Jack remained where he had been for most of the day, but as the tools were returned and the field grew still, he stepped forward slightly. Not into the center. Just enough to be seen if someone chose to look. He did not speak. He did not need to. His presence marked the end of something and the beginning of something else, just as it had that morning. The officer approached him again, slower now, his steps measured not by authority but by thought. He looked out over the field, then back toward the yard in the distance where the outlines of the fence caught the last of the sunlight. "It looks different," he said. Jack nodded once. "It is," he replied. The officer studied the rows again, then shifted his gaze toward the women as they began to move back in a loose line, no longer confined, no longer held together by anything but direction. "They worked well," he added. Jack did not respond immediately. His eyes followed Anna as she walked, her steps even now, no longer testing the ground but moving with it. "They worked like people who were given a chance to," he said after a moment. The officer absorbed that, his expression unreadable but no longer rigid. The group moved slowly toward the yard, the distance between them natural, not forced. Anna walked without looking down now. Her gaze stayed forward, not fixed on anything specific, but open. The ground beneath her feet remained the same. Dry. Firm. Unchanged. But the way she moved across it had shifted entirely. As they reached the edge of the yard, the place where the chains still lay came into view. The metal was partially covered now, the shape softened by a thin layer of dust that had settled over the day. No one stopped. No one pointed. No one acknowledged them. Anna's eyes passed over the spot briefly, not lingering, not avoiding. Just seeing. Then continuing. The others did the same. The chains remained where they were, no longer part of the path, no longer part of the movement. Behind them, the field held the last light of the day, rose catching the gold of the setting sun, quiet evidence of something that had taken place without noise, without force, without announcement. And as the sky deepened toward evening, the space between what had been and what now existed settled into something steady, something that did not need to be explained to be understood. Night did not arrive all at once. It eased in slowly, replacing the last gold of the sun with a softer blue that settled over the camp and the land beyond it. The air cooled just enough to be noticed, a quiet shift that followed the work of the day like a closing statement that did not need to be spoken aloud. The yard was still when they returned. Not empty, but settled. Tools rested where they had been placed. Footprints marked the ground in overlapping patterns that told the story of movement without needing to be read. Anna stepped across the threshold of the yard without breaking her stride. The same ground. The same space. But she moved through it differently now. Not because anything had changed around her. Because something had changed within her. The barracks stood ahead, their wooden frames catching the last of the fading light. A few windows reflected the sky, turning them briefly into mirrors before the darkness took them back. The guards remained at their posts, their presence steady, unchanged in position, but quieter in perception. No commands were given. None were needed. The day had already shaped what would follow. Anna slowed as she reached the steps leading inside. Not from hesitation. From awareness. She paused for a fraction of a second, her hand resting lightly against the wooden railing. The surface was worn smooth, shaped by years of use. A simple detail. But real. She stepped inside. The interior held the same order it had that morning. Rows of beds. Folded blankets. Personal spaces marked not by ownership, but by presence. The women moved quietly, each returning to a place that had been assigned, but now felt slightly less imposed. Anna sat on the edge of her bunk, her hands resting in her lap. For a moment, she did nothing. No adjustment. No movement. Just stillness. Then she looked down at her hands. The gloves were gone. Removed when the tools were set aside. What remained were faint lines across her palms, impressions left by the work of the day. Not deep. Not permanent. But visible. She traced one of the marks lightly with her thumb, as if confirming it belonged there. As if confirming it had come from her. Outside, footsteps moved across the yard, quieter now, slower, the rhythm of duty easing into the rhythm of evening. A lantern was lit somewhere beyond the window, its glow soft and contained, casting a small circle of light that did not reach far but did not need to. Anna lifted her gaze toward the window, watching as the light held steady against the growing dark. It did not change the night. It simply existed within it. Across the room, one of the other women lay back on her bunk, her arms resting at her sides, her breathing even. Another sat with her back against the wall, eyes closed, not asleep, but at rest. No one spoke. Not out of fear. Out of something else. A quiet understanding that words were not required to hold what the day had brought. Anna lowered her gaze again, her posture easing, her shoulders no longer held in the same careful alignment they had carried that morning. She leaned back slightly, allowing the structure of the bed to support her weight without resistance. It was a small shift. Almost unnoticeable. But it was there. Outside, near the edge of the yard, the place where the chains had fallen remained untouched. The metal lay where it had been left, now fully settled into the dust, its shape softened by time and stillness. No one had returned to move it. No one had needed to. It no longer held a purpose. The night deepened. The camp grew quieter. And in that quiet, something remained. Not loud. Not visible. But certain. They had been brought here as prisoners. They had been processed, assigned, expected to follow. All of that remained true. But something else had been placed beside it. Something that did not replace the reality of their situation, but stood alongside it, unchanged by rules or boundaries. Anna closed her eyes, not to escape the day, but to hold it. The step onto open ground. The weight that had not returned. The sound of metal meeting dust and staying there. She did not smile. She did not need to. The shift had already happened. It did not announce itself. It did not ask to be seen. It simply existed. Quiet. Steady. And impossible to take back.